Welcome to the Festival of Dangerous Ideas podcast. My name is Danielle Harvey and I'm the festival director. FODI is the original Disruptive Ideas Festival based in Sydney, Australia, that aims to bring to light important conversations that push the boundaries of conventional thought. FODI gathers the world's best experts, innovative thinkers and mischief makers to provoke and inspire curious minds. Masculinity has become a battleground. From the gender pay gap to domestic violence and rape, the idea of what it means to be a man has been heavily scrutinised in recent times. Meanwhile, the gender wars, fueled by mainstream conservatives, technology and social media, has shifted society's ideas in a dangerous direction. Has the recent focus on women had a negative effect on masculinity? Are men and boys' feelings of shame and exclusion contributing to a crisis? And is masculinity necessarily toxic? Join writer and activist Tarang Chawla, researcher Michael Flood and author Anna Krien as they uncover what men can bring to the table and how we can find a place for them in society. This is the 2024 session Positive Masculinity, chaired by anthropologist Monty Badami.
Good afternoon, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Monty Badami. I'm an anthropologist and I'll be the chair of this session on positive masculinity. Before we get going, folks, I think it's really important just to acknowledge the Gadigal people, the traditional custodians of this land, and just acknowledging that this land has a story that precedes this moment and that can actually influence the way that we show up in this moment. And whilst we're thinking about stories, it's important to recognise that when we're talking about masculinity, it too has a history and a story that is going to affect how we show up in this moment. And so to help me to talk about positive masculinity, I'd like to introduce our panellists. I'd like to start with Tarang Chawla, who is the Commissioner at the Victorian Multicultural Commission, where he works to bring violence and lived experiences of culturally diverse people to policymakers. He's also the co-founder of Not One More Niki, a grassroots non-profit working to end men's violence against women, named in the memory of his younger sister, Nikita, who was murdered by her partner in 2015. We have Professor Michael Flood, who is an internationally recognised researcher on men, masculinities and gender, on violence against women and violence prevention. Michael has made significant contributions to the academic and public understanding of men's involvement in preventing violence, specifically against women, and also building gender equality.
That's what I wrote anyway.
Made it easy for me. And I'd also like to introduce Anna Krien, who's a journalist, an essayist, a writer and a poet. She's the author of Acts of Grace, of Night Games, Sex, Power and Sport, Into the Woods, The Battle for Tasmania's Forests. She's a regular contributor to the Monthly, amongst other sources, where she's been active in discussing misogynistic radicalisation of boys in schools and the growing influence of people like Andrew Tate. So we have, did you hear it? So I want to start by managing some expectations, folks. It's a massive topic, right? Like, need to own the fact that we are not going to deal with masculinity in an hour. We might not even scratch the surface. And so I'm going to invite you to expect and accept non-closure, but have this as a chance to really open up the conversation. And so, as we talk about this, I think I just want to state what I've interpreted to be the problem, and that is that right now we are not winning the struggle against rape and domestic violence. In fact, there's been an almost 30% increase between 2022 and 2023. Whilst there have been some advances, the gender pay gap is still at 21.7%, and women are still not being equitably represented in leadership and leadership roles like business and politics. But whether it's real or perceived, the gender wars, fueled not only by mainstream conservatives, but also by technology and social media, has shifted society's ideas in a dangerous direction, and masculinity is the battleground upon which this war is fought. There's been an obvious swing in the pendulum towards women, but there's a perception that it has gone too far. There's a perception that the focus on women has had a negative and damaging effect on men. There's a perception that masculinity is seen as necessarily toxic, and men and boys are experiencing enduring feelings of exclusion, shame about being a man. And this has contributed to what many people call a crisis of masculinity, where men and boys don't really know their place in society, where they're profoundly disconnected and lonely, where they don't know how to connect with other people in healthy ways, where we have high representation of mental health, suicide, substance use, and where the majority of violence enacted against women and men is enacted by men. Increased loneliness, isolation, combined with a general fear of being able to talk about these very important issues, sometimes just from fear of being cancelled, has led young men right into the hands of misogynistic alpha male influencers like Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson. We're seeing an increase in misogynistic behaviour in schools, resulting in many female teachers feeling unsafe and leaving the profession. Right-wing terror threats make up roughly 30% of ASIO's current counter-terror caseload, and recruitment from young, disenfranchised or disengaged boys is the current priority. Clearly we've got a problem, right? And so I want to start from this position and that accepts this problem as a fact and builds on something, Tarang, that you said late last year, and that was, that two things have to be true when we're having this conversation. That male privilege is real, it exists, that men are not being discriminated against the way that women are by virtue of their gender, and the individual experience of being a boy or a man can be really hard. Tarang, what are we doing wrong?
Did I say that?
You did.
Yeah, I peaked in 2023. A lot of things, right? We're doing a lot of things wrong. But part of even responding to a question like that is that if we're asking what we're doing wrong, we're sometimes coming at it from a deficit-based approach rather than a positive or strengths-based approach, right? The session title is Positive Masculinity, and I'm hopeful that there will be some optimism by the end of the hour, that we leave with a sense of an idea that there's a better, more holistic form of masculinity, or maybe the rejection of masculinity as a concept altogether, so that people are free to live their lives as they so choose. I think we're doing a lot of things wrong though, and what we have to think about when we're talking about what we're doing wrong is how we're defining the problem. You know, like what's the outcome that we're seeking? So when we're talking about things like the alarming rates of male suicide, we have to look at the causal factors of men's loneliness, men's sense of isolation, men's reluctance to seek help, whether that's through formal therapy or peer support networks. If we're talking about intimate partner violence and homicide, and as you raised the increasing rates that we're seeing year on year over the last few years, we have to think about what are the drivers of that behaviour, right? And so I think it's really, really important to acknowledge, much like we have to have the idea that two things can be true, as you said in your introduction, that what we're doing wrong depends on what problem we're trying to solve, right? But at its core, I think we're losing the fight, or we're losing the battle with meaningfully engaging men and boys. And I think one of the reasons for that is that in Australia we have a real absence of positive masculine role models, right? In the media, in business, in politics. And we also approach men and masculinities, I think in Australia, as though men are monolithic, right? As though there's only one idea of manhood and masculinities. And you're of South Asian origin, I'm of South Asian origin. We were talking before and hearing about Michael's experiences of living in different parts of Australia. Men and masculinities are as diverse and intersectional as women's and other gender diverse people's experiences of life is. And I think one of the things that we're doing wrong is that we're not recognizing in our efforts to engage men and boys that there needs to be that richness, that diversity and that complexity, right? And I just one thing, we'll probably touch on this later, Monty, but one caution with that is that whenever we're using any of this stuff around the intersectionality of boys and men or the diversity of boys and men, it can never be used as a way to justify, minimize or excuse patriarchal norms, right? It can never be used as a way to downplay the significance of the impacts of men's choice to use violence, right? When women use violence, the consequences are significantly less profound than men's use of violence. And I think it's really, really conscious that we do that. And particularly with the younger generation and the rise of spaces like the manosphere, what we're doing wrong is that we're not engaging boys and men appropriately.
Really powerful, and I love that we are starting off by acknowledging the intersectional nature, the intersectional identities of young men and boys, and to really start to pull out that complexity without ignoring the harm that is occurring as well, the harm that is occurring to both men and women, to boys and girls. Doctor, with regards to that, and tying into engaging with men and potential offenders. Dr. Zach Seidler, who's the Global Director of Men's Health Research for Movember, said that we cannot prevent domestic violence without addressing the underlying mental health risk factors among male perpetrators. The boys and men most at risk of perpetration are massively overlooked because empathy of any kind, including delving into the complexities of men's lives, is considered by some to amount to condoning or excusing perpetration. That even just contemplating the complexity of young men's lives who may be at risk of perpetrating is almost condoning or excusing it. So there's a lot of stereotypes, there's a lot of cliches or essentialist ideas, a lot of division, a lot of binary thinking, right, around this idea of masculinity. And Anna, I know that in Night Games you really wrestled with the complexity and the nuance of this. Like building on what Tarang has said, where's the nuance in this conversation?
Well, I think if we don't seek to understand violence, then we are condoning it, basically, because you can be as theoretical as you want to be, you can be as on the rightist side of history as you want to be, but if you don't want to look at the problem in the face, in the eye, and see it for what it is, we're never going to fix it. And that requires giving oxygen and space to people who we're excluding. And I think, it's about looking, it's not, we need to, we're so stuck in this culture war moment that we need to actually look for the problem for what it is. I mean, it's recently been revealed. We've had a decade of sort of prevention against, trying to prevent violence against women, of concerted effort, policy effort, and we've had the death of women at the hands of their partners rise. We've actually had it rise. We've also found in the last 10 years that 1 in every 3 of those perpetrators was on bail or parole. And I vividly remember reading a fantastic book by James Gilligan, who's an American psychiatrist, and he wrote, "You can't expect to put a dog in a closet for a month, and you can do that, but you don't want to be standing there when you open the door to that closet." Okay, we are burying boys and men alive in the prison system. There's this incarceration epidemic, and I really think that there is, by allowing that to happen, we really are saying that we don't care for precious lives because it's okay to have this kind of see men's bodies and lives as objects of violence. And I think the incarceration epidemic is a point and sort of a really good juxtaposition of, if we really want to win this battle, then we need to be looking at the incarceration epidemic. We need to be looking at things that aren't sort of ideas about gendered or equality, people, it's not a mark for feminism to have a woman in a job that usually a man holds. That's a personal gain. What we need to be looking at is, intergenerational poverty, intergenerational trauma, if we really actually want to be tackling toxic masculinity and violence against women.
Wonderful. I think that's a really good point. Thank you. And so really drawing out the complexity, looking at how masculinity doesn't exist in a vacuum, that there are all these other social, political, economic influences that shape the experience and the manifestation of masculinity as we see it, right? Really, really powerful. But I think we've found ourselves in this context where all those variables are at play. And there has been a lot of movement. I mean, I know, like when I saw the Barbie film with my family, and I was academically, I was raised by a post-colonial feminist. I was like, yes, this is amazing. I was so excited. I absolutely loved it. But I also work with a lot of disenfranchised young boys, lots of disengaged boys, a lot of them, from low socioeconomic backgrounds who come from trauma backgrounds as well, right? And I found out that there are a lot of young boys who saw Barbie, and it actually made them feel really bad about themselves. And it made them feel bad about being a boy. And so we're talking about vulnerable kids, right? We're talking not about kids who haven't chosen the mask of masculinity, kids who are born into an already gendered world, kids who, if they take off their mask, there is actual risk of physical, emotional, social harm. We're not talking about the Andrew Tates, right? That this kind of masculinity is thrust upon them. They're often sweet boys who are trying to work out what the world expects for them and always feeling like they're never measuring up, right? But young men and boys aren't having these conversations. They're not having conversations about the complexity of this situation, and they're not doing it precisely because they feel that they can't talk about it. They feel that if they talk about anything to do with masculinity, that there is a fear of being called toxic or being cancelled. And I'm seeing this anxiety play out, with their dads and with their mums, and there's a very real fear for them that the term masculinity, toxic masculinity, is actually causing more harm than good. The idea is if you're always told that you're toxic, at what point do you just accept it and be it, right?
Well, it's the stereotype effect, isn't it?
100%. Yeah. And this is the stuff that you say that we need to pull apart.
I mean, I kind of see toxic masculinity as a safe place. It's not to us people looking in. It looks very cold and dark and unaffectionate. But to me, when you think of a safe place, it's a safe place. You put on your shield, you put on your armour, and you're safe. You're all toxic, you're all together, and you're in a group.
And when we talk to these young boys, and when we talk and we look at disenfranchised men, there is that deep need for belonging, that deep feeling of desire for connection in some way, right? And so I'd like to put this question to you, Michael, based upon your research into men and masculinities. Is all masculinity toxic? Is the term itself useful anymore?
Yeah. I'll happily speak to that, but I wanted to disagree with something you said a moment ago. You said that boys and men often don't talk about masculinity in a kind of an open and critical way. I think that's true, but I don't think it's true as to why they do so. You said boys and men don't do that because they're afraid of being cancelled. They're kind of aware of a feminist critique. I don't think that's very common. I think what's much more the case is that masculinity is normative. That is, it's taken for granted. It's the air that boys and men breathe. And so it's just gender's not visible to, I think, lots of boys and men. And there's also a kind of powerful policing of masculinity where you know that if you're a boy at school and you start questioning, these odd social expectations about being a man, you'll be told gay, you'll be called a fag, you'll be called a pussy, and 1,000 other things. So the thing that keeps boys and men silent is not an awareness, in general, is not the awareness of a kind of feminist norms. It's much more the policing of masculinity itself, which is largely by other boys and men, although it's also by women and girls and others. Anyway, to ask your question, the question was, is all masculinity toxic? So let's go back a bit. The term masculinity itself, I use the term in an open-ended way. Masculinity refers to the behaviours, the characteristics that are expected of boys and men. Very open-ended, so they could be good, they could be bad, they could be deeply patriarchal or highly equitable, and we know that the behaviours and characteristics expected of boys and men differ in different cultures, in different countries, have differed over time, and so on. So I use the word masculinity in an open-ended way. Toxic masculinity then refers to a particular version of masculinity, and the term is widely used for that version of masculinity based on always being dominant, being tough, being stoic, being compulsively heterosexual, being emotionally shut down, and so on. And so it names one version of how to be a man that is part of Australian culture. So the term toxic masculinity is like the term toxic food. It names one particular form of food that is harmful in some way. And I think there's two key insights that come with the notion of toxic masculinity. One is that the boys and men who try to live up to toxic masculinity suffer harm themselves. That having to always be tough, always be strong, always be in control is crappy for your emotional and physical health. And there's good evidence from a series of man box surveys in Australia, surveys that refer to the man box, that the boys and men who conform more strongly to those ideals of masculinity are more likely to have thought about suicide in the last month, more likely to drive dangerously, more likely to be isolated and have no one to ask for help. So one insight is that toxic masculinity is limiting for boys and men themselves. But a further key point is that toxic masculinity feeds into the harm that some boys and men, hashtag not all men, but some boys and men perpetrate against women and girls and against other boys and men and others. Because again, it's well documented from that Australian man box research that the boys and men who conform more strongly to those particular ideals are also more likely to perpetrate sexual harassment, more likely, in fact, 27 times more likely to have sexually assaulted a female partner than other boys and men. And so I like those key insights of the phrase toxic masculinity, that there's a particular model of how to be a man that's pervasive and that's shaping men's and boys' lives and the lives of those around them. I don't like the fact that the term is often misheard as saying there's something fundamentally wrong with being a boy or being a man. You know, it's routinely misheard in a way that's unhelpful. So I want to popularise a feminist critique of patriarchal models of masculinity, but I think we need to do a better job of that than we have thus far, given how routinely it's misheard by men and boys themselves.
Yeah, really, really powerful. Thank you. I think, absolutely. Look at that. and I think it's important, the idea that there is this all-pervasive, coercive, punitive form of masculinity that is enforced upon young men and boys, young men and men, and it's everywhere, right? That is an effect and a force that is shaping men's dispositions and unwillingness to talk about it. But
I should say, 3/4 of young men don't agree with that.
Yeah. And this is the point, right? This
don't
is
agree with that model.
And this is what I want to pick up on, because some of the work that we've been doing in those schools with these young boys is that they actually do want to talk about masculinity, but they don't know how. By virtue of the fact are actually supposed to be in a much smaller room, right? This seminar, this session blew out because it is clearly a really important topic to talk about. That perhaps, two things can be true. Perhaps there is that really restrictive, punitive form of masculinity that is enforced, that makes people feel that they have to, violently enforce those rigid, traditional concepts of masculinity. And there are young men and boys and men and women who want to unpack this, but don't know how, don't feel safe to do so, or are afraid of some of the other forms of punishment and shame that come from them when they talk about something that doesn't conform to the current cultural milieu around gender and masculinity.
Well, there's a lot of assumed knowledge, isn't there? There's a lot of, you need to behave like this, and this is appropriate, that's inappropriate, that's toxic, and that's not. But there's no sort of granting of the helpfulness of history in order to sort of imbue those behaviours. I mean, I have 2 sons, they're 9 and 10, and if I was to not say anything to them, just let culture hit them without me trying to filter it and mediate it and all that kind of stuff, they are looking at a lot of bringing in great books, rebel stories for girls are awesome at sport, all this fantastic stuff. And if I was to just watch it and see how it lands, they would be going, yeah, that's cool. Why are girls getting all this attention? And they don't have the critical capacity to look out beyond them and say, well, look at Parliament, look at the way the world's been run. It takes history. So, I mean, in school, the curriculums, it's like, God forbid you actually teach anything and a history because everything's controversial, but there's nothing wrong with pushing your bike out with your sons and saying, hey, when bikes were invented, when women got on them, people threw stones at them. And my boys are going, that's fucked up. I was like, we'll go to a pub and have a pub dinner. It's like, hey, did you know that when a woman used to go into a bar and order a beer, men poured beer on their heads? I'm like, that's really weird. And so education is necessary. You can't just expect people to roll over and behave in a certain way. Children especially have a really fierce sense of fairness, and it's really usually very wrong-headed, very muddled, but it's like, his ice cream is that size and my ice cream should also be that size. And you've got to actually say, well, look, this is a redistribution of power, okay? So we need to explain to you that, you're a bit too powerful in this household, so you're only getting a little bit of ice cream. And this person, it's been hard for them, so they're getting a lot of ice cream. And in order to eventually we all get the same amount of ice cream, but it's going to take, a few decades. So you kind of just have to, it involves talking, it involves history, but there's just so much, we punish confusion, we punish clumsiness. God forbid, intimacy requires vulnerability, right? And that's going to usually result in harm or joy. That is just part of life. But if they say, why is she getting that? Why is that happening? We're allowed to just to snap, because that's how it's fair, this is how this is appropriate. The word appropriate is banned in my house because it's bullshit. And you can't bring up anyone saying this is how you should be and this is how you shouldn't be without context, without history, without this is why, this is a big project. It's not a project that can be done overnight. This is a big project.
But that emotional labour is still placed squarely on your shoulders as a parent to do it. As a parent, we know sometimes we just want to tell them to eat the freaking ice cream, right? And the same thing might be true for different marginalised identities.
Well, I disagree. I really hate this idea that that's my emotional labour. I love being a parent. I'm not clocking on and off.
I am trying to make the metaphor about masculinity.
No, I know, but I committed to bringing up as much, to do the best I can. And this idea that, there's that great New Yorker article, which is this cartoon, which is like these parents saying, but I did the dishes yesterday, and they're like using these powers against each other because, we're all just trying to do the pros and cons of our life, how much I did compared to you. When you commit to having a family, you commit to having a family.
Yeah. But then when we bring it back to the gender conversation, right, in terms of dealing with this injustice and this inequity, it takes a lot of energy to explain that history every time a young man or a boy or a man, when it's not your job. Yeah, which is
why it comes back to we can't just be focusing on this gender argument. It's intergenerational. It's this education. The education gap is massive at the moment, and it's widening. Private schools are an absolute travesty for how that is segregating our society. And so if we focus on, we can't help the boys because that's wrong, because we should be helping the girls. It's like, no, we should, this entire society is becoming more and more segregated, and we're losing people through the cracks, regardless of their sex, regardless of how they identify. And I just think, this idea of literacy and these are really strong pillars that we are letting erode while we're throwing cream buns at one another over our gender. It's like, meanwhile, these things that should be part of our foundation are eroding.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. I think one of the things when we were talking, or before we even came here today, was the possibility that we would have three people who generally agreed around gender. And one of the questions we asked was like, well, what's dangerous about this conversation? We got, potentially four people who are very sympathetic to feminist ideas and feminist perspectives and are critical of restrictive forms of masculinity. But we are here at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. So what are some of the dangerous ideas that we really need to be talking about in order to shift this conversation into something that is much more productive, to push it into a more productive direction? I'd love to start with you, Tarang.
I saw you looking at me, and I just thought, is this the the South Asian Brotherhood where it's like, I think building off, one of the dangerous ideas here, and it's building off something that you were touching on, Anna, and I want to say it explicitly, is that conversation around masculinity is insufficient if it's not conversation around masculinities plural, right? And also any conversation on masculinities that does not include conversations and action towards addressing structural inequities on class, on race, and the distribution of power will not see the title of this session, in practice, in Australia or anywhere in the world. We'll not have positive masculinity or masculinities if we don't address those other factors. And private school environments are one of those things, right? And I think a dangerous idea is that we simultaneously have to not give up hope on men and masculinities and young boys' experiences, but we must at the same time grapple with compassionate accountability. This notion, particularly in recent times, around men's mental health as an explanation or a justification to minimize men's violence, is really, really harmful because it undoes the work of feminist movements. We can't talk about men's violence against women in today's context, and we've had many rallies across the country this year, without thinking about when are the most dangerous times for women. And there'll be women here who say, well, all the time, I'm never safe. But there are, and that's a very, common thing to hear, and it's quite confronting as a man to hear that women will say they don't feel safe in any setting. But statistically, women are often most at risk of harm from a man known to them, right? And particularly during a context of separation. And if we start having conversations that allow men and their pathologies to be front and center, right? What of the human rights of women in the context of separation? What of a woman's right to self-determine, to be independent, to leave a relationship? And that has its, underpinnings in history, in post-second wave feminism, an underbelly of men who enact power and control. And so if we're talking about men and masculinities and the foundations that I think, Michael Flood laid so well around what are the behaviours around men and masculinities and that rigid adherence to the man box ideas of what it means to be a man, well, a loss of power and control is underpinned by a sense of entitlement. And we have to question, where does that come from in boys and men? Where are they socialised into that? And I think the dangerous idea there for me is that we have to have a mindset with inculcating boys and men with a sense of curiosity. The thing that I find so inherently fascinating about masculinities is how fragile masculinity is. For something that purports itself to be so tough, the moment that a boy starts doing things that are not fitting into that box that Michael referred to, they're policed, right? And it may be overt, using physical violence, or it can be covert, exclusion. You become part of the out-group. Right, and we've all got experiences of that. Some of the most common, the things that are gendered expectations of behaviour. Boys playing with, pink dolls, right? And then they might be 3 years of age, and they go to kinder, and then all of a sudden it's seen that boys are meant to play with, blue dolls or whatever, or action figurines, right? Or I used to, my mum used to paint her nails every Sunday evening, right, before the week, and I used to ask my mum to paint a couple of my nails, right? Had nothing to do with my expression of my gender identity. It was actually just a moment of connection between a parent and child, right? And my mum told me that one day, and in adulthood she told me that one day I just stopped because I got teased for it at school, because boys don't wear nail polish, right? And I just think, who the fuck cares, right? But masculinity, especially in Australia, is so fragile. It's piss weak, right? And the irony of it is that it's like meant to be this really tough thing. You look at the archetype of men and masculinities, and it's like this dominant football. I was going to say AFL, but I know I'm in New South Wales, so NRL or whatever Union League. I don't understand. But it's this idea of what these men look like in particular, right? And it's unattainable, right? And so it's always interesting to me when I'm, seeing this expectation of like the pressures on women to conform to something. Men are under so much pressure, but for quite a while, there's not been an avenue for them to do that. And I think a dangerous thing we have to do is actually have curiosity with our, boys and adolescents to let them figure out what their view of masculinity is.
Curiosity, compassionate accountability, right? It's amazing because I just go, that's not dangerous.
I know.
So, Anna, what do you feel?
Yeah, well, I remember
not to dump on
No.
you.
No.
I can leave if it's not enough.
I think it's really, really important. But what confounds me is that right now this is dangerous.
Yeah, well, I think it's because Monty asked us earlier, it's not just a stage thing. What's your dangerous idea? And I was thinking, do we just let all I'm thinking all the dangerous ideas, and then I was like, I sort of looked at him. I was like, what happened to me? Like, where was the moment where gender revealed itself? And it was friendship, and it was policing in the schoolyard, and it wasn't the boys policing; it was the girls policing. And I had no idea of gender, and I was absolutely the happiest in my skin, and had my best friend was a boy, and I got policed. And I remember from that moment on, I didn't like school. And then I realised the same thing happened to my son. I didn't realise until years later. His best friend was a girl, and then they suddenly stopped. I didn't realise, but he'd got policed. What is it about, how can we encourage and flourish friendship between the sexes, between all, whatever you are? And I remember when I was writing Night Games, and I was looking at these footballers and how tightly bonded they were, and the poison that goes with those tight bonds. And I remember having this moment of, you poor things, there's no female friendship in your life. Females are only objects, and they're only they're moments of notches for one another. And for me, personally, I can't stand being in a one-gender place or in a one-gender room. I can't go to, one mum said, do you want to come to our mums and wine night? And I went, I would rather fucking not. And also, because at first I thought it was wine as in WHINE. But then I was like, but if some dads come, I'd love to. But I have no desire to be in a space with no commingling. I have no desire for it. And I feel actually quite uncomfortable, and there obviously is something about having these different balances and these different tenors that we bring together as a whole, and I thoroughly love that. And the policing starts very early, and obviously it's coming from the adults somewhere along the line of, you must not be friends with that person.
It's happening from the other kids.
Yeah,
right?
But where are they getting it from?
Everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. Socialization is not just parenting and child rearing, though, right?
Yeah.
It's and I'll give you, I saw something today in the Sydney Morning Herald, and it was an article about the very horrific gang rape of a medical doctor, a woman in India, and it rightfully exposed many of the issues in a deeply patriarchal, misogynistic undercurrent of a society. But it was framed as though, and the headline was something around like the issue with India and what it's grappling with. And maybe I'm sensitive, right? Because I was born, in fact, I was telling you before, today's the anniversary of the day that I migrated to Australia many years ago. And maybe I'm sensitive, right? But I thought, nah, man, it's not an India problem, it's not a US problem, it's an everywhere problem, right? When we've had 50 plus women, allegedly murdered by men this year, it's a problem here. Per capita, if a woman is being, allegedly murdered every 4 days in Australia in 2024, how progressive a society are we truly? Right? So that's what I'm saying, is that the socialization happens at such a young age. And so the moment any young person acts out of that box, right? Even questioning it, the forces to keep them in start. And the analogy I want to draw is that I read this brilliant quote. I'll let you decide if it's brilliant. I thought it was good. And it was the problem with Australia is not so much that we're the descendants of the rebel convicts, but that we're the descendants of the prison guards. Right? So we got the stick and we'll beat you. The moment that you act out, we'll beat you. Right? And it's metaphorical, but when we're talking about men, it's often physical violence to police men's behaviour. Right? And there's no hope for positive masculinity when shame, embarrassment, fear is being weaponized to keep this veneer of perfect manhood. alive.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that. I think this idea of situating toxic masculinity within these broader social processes, right? Like, we tried to raise our kids in a particular way, and yet we have no control over those coercive gendered influences that have shaped them. And our family struggled with it. And you know, evil, rapey men don't just come from nowhere, right? They're the extreme expression of a society that we are a part of, and that where there are aspects that we condone, normalise and give permission to.
They're not very extreme, though.
They're not, though, are they?
And this Manbox
they're
survey,
not, exactly.
The Manbox survey among young men 18 to 30, 26% had sexually assaulted a female intimate partner.
And this
it's not
is
very extreme.
This is the myth of
one
that,
quarter,
that line between the good man and the bad man,
Yeah.
you know, which fuels the not all men
It's
narrative.
a fuzzy
right?
line.
It is a very fuzzy line, and by the same token, the shame that Tarang was talking about is not just shame that is enacted by men against other men to enforce masculinity. It's also something that's been that is a big part of the discourse in terms of in trying to get men to be more positive. There is shame associated with the way that we're enforcing alternative forms of masculinity. And whether it's traditional or alternative forms of masculinity, they're both telling people how to be a man. I'm interested in your take on this, Michael.
Yeah. Look, I think part of our work should very much be popularising and disseminating rich, engaging, diverse models of healthy or positive masculinity. So finding positive role models, speaking to young men in online spaces, promoting the voices of men who do act in equitable and inclusive ways, and that are diverse in terms of their ethnicity and their sexuality, and indeed their gender identity and so on. But one dangerous idea I wanted to offer is that as well as doing that, as well as offering alternatives to that dominant patriarchal model, we also need to actually encourage men and boys to disinvest from masculinity per se, to actually care less about whether they're perceived as properly men at all. So as well as trying to change the content of masculinity, we also need to be trying to diminish men's and boys' investment in masculinity, full stop. That's one dangerous idea. A second dangerous idea...
Let him celebrate it, Michael.
There's clocks in front of us, and they're going down so quickly. A second dangerous idea is, and this is really blunt, but I actually think we need to raise the bar for what it means to be a good man. I think in all kinds of ways in Australia... dangerous ideas. I think in all kinds of ways in Australia, we set the bar really low. So, you can literally murder your wife and children and the newspapers will still call you a good bloke in some context or other. You can turn up to the park with your child and push them on a swing a bit and you're father of the year. You can not sexually assault your girlfriend and that makes you boyfriend of the year. So we set the bar really low, and so I do think we actually want to raise the standards for what it means to be a good father, a good boyfriend, a good man in general. There is a growing field of healthy masculinities work in Australia, and I'm really pleased to see that. I spent a long time, I've been involved in this work for 30 plus years. I spent a long time arguing for why we need to engage men and boys. I spend much more time now arguing for how we engage men and boys. But I'm concerned that healthy masculinities field as it stands is focused almost entirely on boys and young men in schools, who are some of the most powerless people in our society. It doesn't hold our male political leaders or religious leaders or others to account. It doesn't look at the many other settings, faith institutions, politics, the workplace, where rigid patriarchal forms of masculinity are kept alive. So I actually think we need to scale up the work of transforming masculinity much more energetically than we are at this point.
Yeah, there we go.
Can I also say, wouldn't it also be helpful if we were consistent? In the sense, I just think disinvest from masculinity, all that kind of stuff, but also shouldn't we make sure that we make it fundamentally known that we treasure men and boys and women and girls and everyone in between? How can we be against the rape culture outside of prisons, but we're okay with a rape culture inside prisons? Why isn't that on the table? Why do we think it's okay that's okay? Rape culture is massive inside prisons, and we actually think it's good. There's part of us go, good, that's your punishment. Whereas that's actually the biggest test of masculinity ever. We will rape you in jail, and we will take your manhood away. Why are we sending them into the most toxic of places of all? for punishment. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be punished for doing the wrong, for, femicide and sexual assault, but we really do seem to accept that there is a certain amount of violence that is allowed against males. Why do we accept that? It's almost a given that, if there is a war, okay, off you go. I mean, why don't we let them know that we treasure their presence with us? Their presence being a gentle, playful, curious presence. That we value stoicism. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a bad trait. I just think that we really probably should be consistent with making sure that we have a fundamental acknowledgement of deep, deep love and responsibility to each other, and say, that we don't just want to throw you into a tin can when you fuck up, into the most toxic of tin cans when you fuck up, and then we'll let you back out again. I just think we need to be consistent. If we're against rape, we should be against rape in jail. I just think there's some things that are just so constantly categorised as what it's violence. I mean, we see women as sex objects, yes, but we see men as violence objects, and women are part of that problem. We do that. We do that. We send men to war. I think we should probably start, that's something that we should all start owning up to as well. I mean, if you see yourself as a violence object, if you're cast in that light, then what's to stop you from being that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Good point. I'm going to flag right now that there is an opportunity for us to be involved in this conversation through questions. Folks, you will notice that there are two microphones just at the front of the floor here. What I'd like you to do, folks, is if you are interested in asking a question, this is an opportunity to line up at those two microphones. Not to put your hand up, folks, but to line up at those microphones, and then we'll know that that you'll be asking a question. Whilst I'm on that, folks, I think it's really, really important to manage some expectations. We may only have time for 2 to 3 good questions. Really, really important to remember that to start from the assumption, right, that you are all very important people and you all know lots of stuff. Okay, so let's not use this as an opportunity for you to tell us how important you are and how much stuff you know, and be very. And remember the difference between a question and a lecture that is disguised as a question. So if I don't hear a what, where, why, how, when within the first 10 words, I will thank you for your contribution and move you along. So that will happen in about 5 minutes. But before we get there, folks, so we've talked about this need to have hope, to increase and to bring about this, celebrate curiosity, compassionate accountability, to build friendships and create opportunities between men and women, to actually decouple or disentangle ourselves from these defined notions of masculinity, to celebrate diversity. And within that, there was I heard, an opportunity to move beyond a punitive approach and to bring about a more restorative approach. And so, as we start kind of coming around to the end of this session, I'm really interested in, what are the positives? What is good about masculinity that we can bring to this conversation? What are some of the positive ideas of masculinity that men and boys can bring to contemporary life? What resources can we use as men to deal with some of these tough social issues? Don't be all generous and gracious now.
I can have a go. Look, the good news is that if you ask men what they actually, whether or not they agree with that model of toxic masculinity, you always have to be dominant, you have to be in control, a gay man is not a real man, all those kinds of things. Most men, at least 18 to 30-year-old men, 3/4 or 2/3 disagree. They don't think that. They think a gay guy's a real guy. They think men and women should share decision-making relationships. They think men should be involved fathers and so on. So there's kind of good news in some sense in terms of at least young adult men's attitudes. At the same time, there's a growing gender gap. It's not quite as dire as in the US, where young men have literally moved to the right politically. In Australia, that's not true. Young men have not moved to the right, but young men's progress is slower than among young women. So there is an increasing gender gap. But so one resource is men's own attitudes. And I think another resource is a vibrant and still energetic women's movement and the work it's doing to kind of try to hold men to account and hold governments to account and so on. But I am genuinely fearful about an increasingly visible and energetic patriarchal backlash. And I think, backlash is a sign of progress in a sense. You often get pushback when there's progress towards gender equality, but backlash can win. Backlash can be successful, so things go backwards. And so I think one of the key challenges has to be to engage men and boys in these conversations in much richer ways. And we can't do so in the way that I think some men's health advocates and others think, where you only address men's pain. We have to speak to men's pain and the things that many boys and men struggle with, the challenges and pain in boys and men's lives, but we also have to speak to privilege. We have to speak to patterns of unfair power and privilege that many men and boys experience. And lastly, we have to do so very much in compassionate ways, as you said, and in intersectional ways. That is to recognise that the lives of boys and men across Australia are radically different in terms of levels of poverty, levels of violence, levels of access to social and economic power. So we have to start with the kind of messy realities of boys and men's own lives.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Tarang, Anna?
Well, I just think, one thing could be, we should all collectively be demanding an internet that is ethically designed with ethical algorithms. At the moment, it's very hard to counter that kind of amplification. Everyone sees a very different internet. You have these pictures of, we must overcome digital poverty, and you have these ads of these children all in a row looking at a computer as if they're all looking at the same frigging computer. The internet is tailored towards each person. I think we should absolutely be demanding a regulated internet that is with ethical designs at their core. I think it's amazing that for people who have all these great, strong core beliefs that they want to hold to, and yet we all continue to be on the tech bros basic payroll, or this is just. We're all having these really great big combative conversations, and everyone's right, everyone's on the right side of history, and yet we've got Elon Musk going, thanks guys, cashing in, this is sweet. It's like, we really do need to have a collective, it's very difficult to be doing this as an individual. It's very difficult. It needs to be a collective, I yearn for the day when we're on the streets protesting for an ethical internet. For a democratic internet.
Yeah, wonderful, thank you. We talk about this as calling out bad behaviours or institutions, calling in individuals, and calling on each other to make a difference. Tarang?
I want better from our leaders in Australia, across all spheres. I'm not just talking about politics, but definitely there, but across business, across sport in particular. We still platform men who are convicted domestic violence offenders, right? Because they can kick an oval-shaped ball well at some point in their life, right? That fact is a footnote in their life, as far as I'm concerned. The more important one is the harm that they cause to others, right? And, here's a dangerous idea. If we think that boys and men look up to other men, then we should require those men, if they want to be in the public eye as part of their redemption, to speak to their actions, their shame, their experiences, what they learned. Because I think that will shift the dial forward, right? I think at the moment, everything that we talk about when it comes to healthy masculinities, I think Michael touched on this a little bit, it's at a very individual level. It's the idea of have the dinner time conversation if you're a parent, or encourage the individual behaviour change with boys and men. What about the structural power of masculinity? The fact that there are more men named Andrew in the ASX 200 than there are women CEOs, right? That's a fact. right? What about that? What about where power lies? And so one of the things about healthy masculinities is we really have to grapple with the power that's inherent in certain forms of masculinity and challenge that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all my panelists. In the interest of time, folks, I think I might turn over to some of the questions. I think I recognise Rosemary.
Yes.
Would you like to ask?
Hi, Monty. Congratulations. Hi. I'm going to see if I can make it a question. So I've been proudly doing the emotional labour of teaching feminism to young women, men, transgender students for 30 years. I don't particularly, from the work I've had to do on myself, celebrate my whiteness. I don't particularly celebrate being cisgendered. I still look at the privileges involved in that, and I don't think I'm not sure about the essentialist celebration of some identities, knowing that these are relational identities all the way through. And I'll finish with this. Living on a big housing estate, working with living around young men and women. I mean, the young men are going to jail routinely just by class and race.
Rosemary, I'm going to need to pull in an interrogative here. What's the question, my friend?
I question the notion of celebrating an essential masculine identity.
Yes, so the question is, can we really celebrate an essentialist masculine identity? Thank you very much. Who would like to have
already do.
Yeah.
We already do as a society privilege certain types of masculinity, right? So, sorry, you didn't even ask for me to respond, but I think we do that already, right? I think we're already celebrating an archetypal ideal of what being a man is, right? And so this is about alternatives.
Yeah. Michael?
Yeah, so it's absolutely, for me, not about celebrating being a man or celebrating being male, particularly some notion of some kind of essential quality that is always tied to being male. It's instead about giving different meaning to the social categories associated with maleness. In the same way that whiteness historically in Australia has been about occupation and dispossession and racial superiority, and one of the tasks of an anti-racist politics is to attach different meanings to whiteness. Part of it too is also to at least question or even abolish the social categories associated with a form of injustice. And so I see parallels with gender politics.
Yeah, thank you. We've got a question over here. I'm going to remind you, let's start with a what, where, how, why, when. What's your question to the panel?
I just want to say that if being a man means owning your feelings, I'm totally and utterly shitting myself. So I'm not sure that my jaw's going to work properly. But I'd just like to make a comment. I'm sorry.
No. I need it to be a question, my friend. So again.
Okay, well, I'll make it into a question. If we're going to talk about positive masculinity, then we need to talk about what negative masculinity is in a personal sense. We've talking about negative masculinity in a big, massive sense, but what is negative masculinity for me? The question is...
What's the question, my dude?
What is negative masculinity? Great question.
What is competition in young boys and what is shame in young boys? What are they? And if we're going to understand them, if we're going to do something about them, we need to understand what they are. So my question is, what is shame and what is competition in young boys?
Love it. Thank you so much. Take a seat whilst we
what is
answer
anger?
the question. What is competition?
Can we just go for the next question?
Do you want to go to the next one?
Don't you think? Let's just go to the next question, because
I think it's good to acknowledge that there is shame, that there are different versions of masculinity. Mic number one.
Alrighty, this is a how question.
Way!
Okay, all right. So thank you so much. I want to say thank you first, but I just wanted to talk about that notion that women. How can we address this notion? Could you please all shut up and not tease me, because I am actually thinking while I'm doing the question. Thank you. Respect me. Respect the speaker, and I will respect you in turn. Okay, so how can we address this notion that women in a lot of men's lives are often the safest filter to have the discussions about how to be a man, a boy, a human, or anything, especially when they're feeling policed by their male peers as well, because this is where it starts to flow into that emotional labour issue. But I just wanted to discuss, that there is anecdotally, that women are safer filters to have these discussions.
Yeah, so how do we have these discussions when women are the safer filters around them?
Okay, can I just say, that's what I was talking about, friendship. I mean, I think it's a valid... I think you're right. I think women are currently the safe place to have those conversations. But I also... that's why I think we should value friendship and see it flourish from day dot, as opposed to when it's just your partner and you're just like, we're not lying in bed and I'm now allowed to be vulnerable. I think that it shouldn't. First, I'm just worried. I hate the words emotional labour. I hate it. I'm sorry. I think obviously we need to encourage friendship, so it's not just on the one partner. We need to encourage friendship so it's shared. But also, I'd also like to say that I get a lot from my male friendship. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not as if it's not a one-way street. I mean, there's a lot of sharing. What?
I just said, the boys.
Yeah, the boys.
No, you said you get a lot from the men in your life.
I love them, absolutely. I would fight for them.
Just to speak to that question, so I think, for men who want to live richer, more gender equitable lives, part of that is forging strong, intimate, trusting friendships with other men. And I think one mechanism to that, and a valuable mechanism in itself, is men's groups. Not any kind of men's groups, because some are deeply destructive, but anti-sexist or pro-feminist men's groups, where where you build connection based on different kinds of intimacy.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Hey, listen, let's give that a round of applause, folks. We are running out of time. I'm so sorry. As I said, we have to accept and expect non-closure. What I will say is that the panellists will be available for some book signings and some conversation afterwards. I'm okay with the fact that this is a conversation starter and that there is so many more things we have to talk about. But I do want to thank you all for being here today. In particular, I'd like to thank our panellists, Tarang Chawla, Anna Krien, and Michael Flood, for this really wonderful conversation. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Festival of Dangerous Ideas. Thank you, folks.
This session was recorded live at Carriageworks Sydney in August 2024. The Festival of Dangerous Ideas is presented by the Ethics Centre. The Ethics Centre delivers programs and experiences designed to bring ethics to the centre of our life. We offer counselling for individuals, leadership and development services, events, courses and educational resources. As a not-for-profit charity, we rely heavily on donations and memberships. Please visit ethics.org.au to find out more. Thank you.